Shari, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure to be here, Tim. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. So many good things that we want to discuss, and I'm glad you made the time for us. Thanks. So I think a great place to start would be to learn a little bit more about you, Shari, as a president and CEO of Farm Foundation, and I believe a fifth generation farmer. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. So I am a fifth generation farm owner and operator from Nebraska. Our family came from Germany long ago in the 1800s and have been there ever since, farming there in Nebraska.
Well, great. Thanks. And in your role at the Farm Foundation, tell us a little bit more about it, about your organization and your role. And then I'd love to hear a little bit about your professional why. Why are you doing what you're doing, Shari? Why is it important to you?
Sure. So Farm Foundation was established in the 1930s. So think back to then about the Dust Bowl. So we were founded right after the Dust Bowl in the US and the Great Depression. So a really challenging time for the US and for farm families across the US. So we were founded by the governor of Illinois and the CEO of International Harvester to really focus on helping rural communities and farm families. And we've been doing that ever since. But of course, as you can imagine, it has evolved over time. So now we call ourselves a think tank, do tank, really trying to affect change, thoughtful change, using policy, innovation, and education to affect that positive change for food and ag.
Great, thanks. So I know in your time here at the Kelley School in teaching a few different things, of course, and then serving as a consultant in the past, you bring all these experiences to your current role with Farm Foundation. Tell us a little bit more again about the why. Why is this important to you, and where do you see this work that you're doing evolve? Where will it evolve to, and what impact do you hope to have?
Sure. So it's a unique pleasure I have, I guess, is how I'd frame it, to have such a personal, passionate why and a professional why that converge for me in this role. So I actually left the farm first and made a big leap and started working abroad for my first chapter of my career, and really came back to food and farming later in my life as I saw all the changes happening in our food and ag sector, and that our farm family needed to navigate all those changes ourselves. In fact, to an all-female next generation, for one thing, and then all the innovation and technology, which we may touch on today in our conversation. So that's on the personal, passionate side. And then I, about 10 years ago, after having, chapters in finance and consulting in my professional career, decided also to commit my professional career to helping our whole sector navigate all these changes. If our farm family was needing to navigate them, I knew others were needing to navigate it too. So about 10 years ago, I started pursuing pathways to helping others navigate this change. First, founding my own firm to do that with global food and ag companies. And then segueing to try to affect, I guess I'd frame it, a broader scope of issues in terms of the environmental and climate change aspects, the technology and innovation challenges. So when Farm Foundation was looking for a leader to really take Farm Foundation to the next level, to position it for the next 100 years, it really seemed to speak to me, both my professional and personal why. And also the shift of think tank, do tank, really trying to come up with practical solutions for farm families and our sector. So Farm Foundation is really at an exciting time right now of really thinking through how to blitz this change, how to be an advocate and partner in all of this change across our sector, leveraging the things I mentioned of policy, innovation, and education.
Great. Thank you, Shari. So in talking about cultivating innovation in food and farming, who is doing this well? If we look across the global stage, what would you share with us?
What I think is exciting is there are too many examples to share. It's really hard to choose one, but I guess I'd choose a couple of contrasting examples. So I would say Nestle is one that is really taking some bold steps. I think it's too early to say if it's successful or not, but they're one of the boldest global food and ag companies making significant big bets and big investments in navigating innovation and change, to the point of committing, over $1 billion to commit to supporting the change for regenerative food and ag. They've got about 500,000 farmers around the world that they work with, and they've committed thousands of agronomists and extension agents of their own portfolio to support the change. So I see they're willing to help farms navigate that change and integrate the innovation, whether it's technology or practices at the farm level. And that's, I guess, the other kind of contrasting example when you think huge global company navigating change, and then each of our farm families navigating change. There are so many great examples of farm families navigating this change too. And it's hard, especially if you've got a small family operation or small staff, even with a big farm operation, to integrate new technologies, to choose amongst them, because this is such a time of great innovation, whether it's artificial intelligence or sensors in the field or all the software tools, autonomous vehicles. There's so much to choose from, and with a limited time and energy and staff of farm families to sort through them all and integrate them into the farming operations. And yet farm families are doing that all across the US in big and small ways. So lots of great examples of that innovation. And it's really from the convergence of capital, ideas, and people, which is unique about this time. Because in the past, there would have been ideas, but not the capital. But we've seen a flood of capital coming into this sector to really ignite those innovations into our sector.
Thank you. I read about the triple bottom line, and you had shared out a bit about it. Please share with our listeners what it is and why is that important to Farm Foundation and to other organizations.
And I would add, and why it's important to me, that's part of what I'm passionate about, really. Having gone to business school myself and, been in an MBA program where all of us learn, and at the Kelley School too, how to manage the profitability of organizations. It's really broadening that scope to managing all stakeholders was part of how I was trained in my MBA program. And now I think it's broadened to different kinds of language of triple bottom line, meaning economic and social and environmental perspectives that global leaders and organizations want to affect. There's other language that is somewhat similar in terms of the ESG movement, whether that's environmental, social, and governance. And again, lots of capital and corporate commitments in that sector. Also SDG, it's like alphabet soup with all of these things. SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals. All of these things converging right now really to affect change is very exciting and challenging. I would say when you're managing for one thing, that gives you that beauty of focus. But when you extend that lens, it is both a challenge and an opportunity. And yet so many global organizations, and again, at the farm level, are trying to manage for that triple bottom line or for ESG purposes. As everyone has read in the news, climate change is one of the top things that has been voiced and is being addressed by, again, both global companies and at the farm level and here at Farm Foundation.
Yes, thank you. I also read on your website about your writing in using capitalism as a force for social good. What a great concept. And I've heard that shared through other organizations throughout the world. But how is that being done? By putting theory into practice, Shari, how would you say it's possible to use capitalism? And what I mean by that is within the farm industry, what are you seeing as perhaps leadership thought within the farm industry and food agricultural space that this is being done? Does that make sense?
Sure. Well, I'd say there's lots going on with the goal of using capital for the good. As I mentioned before, the jury may be out for if the good is actually being achieved from it, but I think we're seeing lots of intentional investment, both from a literal investment perspective, whether it's in venture capital firms, private equity, or some of the high net worth individuals across the globe targeting their capital towards especially the farming sector. whether that's some of the big names, of Bill Gates and others using their capital for that purpose. But we also see it at the, I'd say more like everyday level of philanthropy at Farm Foundation. So investors big and small, and traditional investment as well as philanthropic capital. There's new tools now, even just with all the GoFundMe aspects, where individuals can invest in things that are important to them around the globe on some of these platforms. So again, it's one of those exciting times of bringing that capital to the table to help affect positive change around the globe.
Great, thank you. So as a leader of an organization, as you put it, putting theory into practice and not only working, but doing, what about doing good, Shari? What are your thoughts about how your organization is doing good, both domestically and perhaps internationally, as the Farm Foundation broaden its scope to include the global agricultural space? And if so, what's that like?
Sure. We have, I would say, always had some global aspect through trade in the farming sector and at Farm Foundation. So trade remains a core aspect of what we do here. And so, in fact, we've been convening folks across the U.S. in what we're calling the U.S.-China Trade Salon Series, where we've gone to different cities across the U.S. to do listening sessions on the U.S.-China trade relationship, which is critical to us geopolitically, in the U.S., economically and environmentally. The list goes on. And that was really interesting to hear some core themes that were similar across the U.S. in terms of how critical the relationship is and the desire for the U.S. to figure it out in partnership with China for supply chains, for the environment, for food security. Those were some of the themes that came up. And yet there were differences across the U.S. in terms of really how to frame that relationship as like a common enemy, kind of harkening back to some of our past geopolitical relationships, versus really looking for a cooperative, co-opetition type of relationship with China. And I think it's really critical time over the next couple of years for us to advance that and figure that out for the food and ag sector, as I mentioned, but also well beyond that.
Absolutely. I would like to see the repairs come sooner rather than later. We're feeling it too with our higher ed partners throughout the world. It's such an important relationship, the U.S.-China relationship, for so many reasons.
And then further on the global aspects, while perhaps in our roots, we originally were really focused on the US, as I mentioned, trade has linked us abroad for many years. We're trying to be thoughtful about how to continue to strengthen our global perspectives here at Farm Foundation. And we have gathered what I'd currently call an informal council of councils of what I consider sister organizations around the globe, partly just as leaders of those organizations, to share our thoughts and issues that we're facing around the globe. And then for us to look for ways to support each other and find those common goals that we can work on a global basis. So in fact, we're actually convening for the first time in person. We've been meeting virtually at the Council of Councils, and we're meeting at the end of this month for our first in-person meeting, which is very exciting.
Great. Congratulations. I'm glad you're able to come together, and hopefully in doing so, you'll have even greater impact.
We hope so too. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Shari, thank you so much for speaking with me today. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. It's very much appreciated.
It was my pleasure, Tim. Thanks again.
Thanks. Take care.